All right, breaking news. President Biden just dropped a bombshell on the Supreme Court. And this comes at a time when Justice Clarence Thomas is accepting lavish gifts from right-wing billionaires, when Justice Thomas Allo is flying a Stop the Steal flag outside of his house. And then he blames it on his wife. And all of these right-wing Supreme Court justices who are taking gifts, who are flying. Right-wing flags are helping Donald Trump speedrun our democracy towards a dictatorship with rulings like the presidential immunity ruling, or the Chevron deference ruling. The presidential immunity ruling perfectly lays the groundwork for Project 2025 by embracing this maximalist version of unitary executive theory that says the President of the United States has complete control over everything. The entire executive branch, with no checks from Congress and no checks from the Supreme Court. Leave a like if you think Project 2025 is too extreme. But President Biden wrote an opinion for the Washington Post. It is short, it is concise, it is incredibly powerful. It says, Opinion Joe Biden. My plan to reform the Supreme Court and ensure no president is above the law. We can and must prevent the abuse of presidential power and restore the public's faith in our judicial system. The writer is the President of the United States, this says. And it says right here by Joe Biden. And can I just point out the difference between Donald Trump, who is constantly undermining our legal and judicial system, and President Biden, who is writing think pieces about how we could restore the public's faith in it. So this reads, the nation was founded on a simple yet profound principle. No one is above the law, not the President of the United States. Not a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States. No one but the Supreme Court's 63 decision on July 1st to grant presidents broad immunity from prosecution for crimes that commit in office means there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. The only limits will be those that are self-imposed by the person occupying the office. And really quickly, what kind of limits do you think Donald Trump will self-impose? He is one of the most impulsive people I've ever seen. Walk this earth to continue if a future president incites a violent mob to storm the Capitol and stop the peaceful transfer of power. Like we saw in January 6th, there may be no legal consequences. And that's only the beginning on top of dangerous and extreme decisions that overturn SLE legal precedents, including ROI Wade the Court, Meade, and a crisis of ethics scandals involving several justices have caused the public to question the court's fairness and independence, which are essential to faithfully carrying out its mission of equal justice under the law. For example, undisclosed gifts to justices from individuals with interests in cases before the court, as well as conflicts of interests connected with January 6th, insurrectionists raised legitimate questions about the court's impartiality. Incredibly legitimate questions, Joe Biden writes. I served as a U.S. Senator for 36 years, including as a chairman and ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. I have overseen more Supreme Court nominations as a Senator, VP, and President than anyone living today. I have great respect for our institutions in the separation of powers. What is happening now is not normal. It undermines the public's confidence in the court's decisions, including those impacting personal freedoms. We now stand in a breach, and here is where President Biden's prescriptions come into play. He has described the problem. Let's hear how he wants to fix it. And that is a difference. Donald Trump doesn't want to actually fix problems. He never has prescriptions. That's why, in the face of increasing threats to America's democratic institutions by and res, I'm calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy. First, I am calling for a constitutional amendment called the No One is Above the Law amendment. It would make clear that there is no immunity for crimes a former president committed while in office. I share our founders' belief that the president's power is limited, not absolute. We are a nation of laws, not of kings or dictators. This is President Biden actually trying to remedy the problems that are scaring so many Americans. Just notice the stark difference between him and Donald Trump, who will shoot down a border bill if it means it benefits him personally. Meanwhile, President Biden, on his way out of power since he's not running for re-election, is focusing on the American people. Second, we have had term limits for presidents for nearly 75 years. We should have the same for Supreme Court justices. So a second idea term limits the United States is the only major constitutional democracy that gives lifetime seats to its High Court. Term limits would help ensure that the court's membership changes with some regularity that would make timing for court nominations more predictable and less arbitrary. It would reduce the chance that any single presidency radically alters the makeup of the court for generations to come. Like the Trump presidency, did I support a system in which the president would appoint a justice every 2 years to spend 18 years in active service on the Supreme Court? I think that's an incredibly unique and good idea. And third, I'm calling for a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. This is common sense. The court's current voluntary ethics code is weak in self-enforced. That is incredibly true when the ethics are voluntary. They're depending on the goodwill of the people. They're not going to be effective, especially when we're talking about the highest court in the country, with effectively no checks, no balances that leads to justice. Clarence Thomas thinking he's just a king. Basically, he can do whatever he wants, and who's going to check him? He's a Supreme Court justice. Justices should be required to disclose gifts. That is common sense refrain. Refrain from public political activity and recuse themselves from cases in which they or their spouses have financial or other conflicts of interest. Now, when President Biden writes refrain from public political activity, he's talking about just Justice Arlo for sure. Obviously, every other federal judge is bound by an enforceable code of conduct, and there is no reason for the Supreme Court to be exempt. All three of these reforms are supported by a majority of Americans as well as conservative and liberal constitutional scholars now. When President Biden says that the majority of scholars support something, he's actually telling the truth. I mean, most Americans, most scholars, want term limits for the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is saying all major legal and constitutional scholars wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. Give me a break. President Biden continues, and I want to thank the Bipartisan Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States for its insightful analysis, which informed some of these proposals. We can and must prevent the abuse of presidential power. We can and must restore the public's faith in the Supreme Court. We can and must strengthen the guardrails of democracy in America. No one is above the law. In America, the people rule. And that is what makes President Biden such an absolutely stellar leader. President Biden is spending his last few months in power making sure that the American people are set for decades to come, and that we have a Supreme Court that works for us, because no matter who wins this election, it's not going to be President Biden. It's going to be VP Harris or Donald Trump. And it's just so incredibly selfless. He stepped down, he stopped campaigning, and he immediately decided to get to work for the American people and sort of foolproof our government for Donald Trump. That seems to be what the Biden administration has been doing. They've been passing laws that make sure Donald Trump can't pass the Schedule F executive order that would reclassify tens of thousands of civil servants and make it easy for Donald Trump to hire and fire loyalists. So the Biden administration is essentially trying to foolproof the American government, foolproof our institutions in several different ways. So if Donald Trump does win, and he comes in swinging, he's not able to do that much damage either way. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world. If you leave a like, hit that subscribe button. We are building a great community at this YouTube channel. And I love every single one of you who watches my video, who likes, who watches until the end. It means the absolute world to me. And we are going to prevail heading into this election. Make sure you guys have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you in the next video.